all of the innovation that I've observed, and the strongest teams are coming out with a layer two solution, whether they're porting their entire protocol over to layer two or they're starting from scratch on a new protocol. Having a layer two strategy is an imperative, check mark to success. Um, Coinbase, for example, is onboarding users directly with to base chain.
Welcome to Trailblazers. Today I'm here with Ace, who works as a core contributor at Aerodrome and Velodrome. Ace, can we start off by kind of talking about how you got into crypto and how you kind of got working with these two projects?
Yeah, it's a long journey. I actually was probably one of the few people who discovered crypto completely independently, at least from, people I've talked to and heard stories from similar to mine. I was working in a career in renewable energy for many years and had my first bonus check and was looking into ways to invest it. And I think I was on Seeking Alpha and looking at, what the ideas for stocks and things like that were, and read an article about how the Indian rupee inflation problem was leading, Bitcoin to go up in price. And I was like, wait, Bitcoin's still around? It was like 2016. And I'm pretty sure I ignored it when I first heard about it and figured it was going to be a failed science experiment. Clearly, it is not that, and it wasn't at the time. And I navigated my way to Coinbase, bought some Bitcoin in 2016, and that was sort of where I jumped in. Similar to most people who found crypto, it's like that's the entry gateway drug, right? And got interested in Ethereum because it was the other one of the few other assets listed on Coinbase, and tried my hardest to understand what the hell a smart contract was, but that was one of the more like abstract ideas that I had come across in tech before, and there was really not a lot written about it outside of like Reddit forums. So I was, an addict to like ETH Trader, Ethereum, the subreddits, and throughout like 2017 and 18 early, like the bull run was just totally insane. I focused exclusively on Ethereum. I remember like hearing rumors about like mainstream companies and law firms getting involved with like this enterprise Ethereum alliance, and it was like, wow, this could really be something. But we still didn't know what the hell it was going to be useful for, besides like a speculative investment. So kind of fast forwarding through like the 2018 to 2020 kind of bear cycle, I continued to follow along, but I didn't really get kind of the light bulb moment until DeFi summer kicked off. Like early 2020, we started to feel what it was like to have like SNX staking rewards or compound yield farming, and then the balancer airdrop, and like that was like insanely lucrative. And I was like, what? This could really be something. There's real money behind this, and I experienced composability firsthand, which is very powerful and addicting. And like protocols were coming and going, popping up like crazy. This open source building environment allows for this type of fast development cycles. So had a really good fortune during the kind of the 2020 COVID. We were all stuck inside yield farming days. Partnered up with some really cool people, and we actually launched a fund for friends and family, and it was actually a pretty successful, 9 to 12 month venture. And that's actually what led me to quit my career in renewable energy, focus exclusively on kind of the investment allocations and yield generation opportunities for the fund. So that's when I kind of went full time, as early 2021. And since then, I've been continuing the fund management, deal with a larger, more regulated fund, kind of an advisory role. We do some project specific advisory as well. And I didn't join, Aerodrome and Velodrome full time until just a month ago. It was, a long term kind of bullish thesis of mine that these VE33 dexes were going to be serious game changers. So I was very close with a lot of the core contributors, like in an unprofessional fashion, or non-professional, I should say, more friendly and took the opportunity to join the team about a month ago.
That's awesome. You've definitely had a longer journey in crypto than most.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what the 3 dexes are and kind of like what these projects are to people who might not be familiar?
Yeah, that's that's a question that I will do my best to distill in like a couple of minutes. So at their core, they have the same pools as like Uniswap or Curve or essentially they have a stable swap pool with low fees, very low slippage for like kind assets. So stable coins to stable coin swaps, ETH to staked ETH swaps. They have volatile asset swaps for more of like USDC ETH pools. Most of the altcoins paired with ETH are all going to be in like the volatile pools. And most recently, we launched our Slipstream pools, which are similar to like the UniV3 style concentrated liquidity. We've adjusted them slightly, but they are very secure and robust and have been battle tested, kind of similar to how Uniswap V3 has. And we essentially are providing a marketplace for traders to come and either provide liquidity or swap directly. Where things get more interesting is understanding the incentives for liquidity providers. And at our core, we look at ourselves as a economic incentives engine that drives deep liquidity for protocols. So the majority of our time is spent directly with protocols who need help, essentially devising a sensible liquidity program, so they can essentially receive very efficient, very capital efficient ways of getting deep enough liquidity through incentivizing people on our protocol who make those decisions. So this is where it gets a bit technical. So we have a token that's launched completely distributed fairly to liquidity providers, either the Velo token on Velodrome and the Arrow token on Aerodrome. Those are going to be earned completely by people who provide liquidity on the platform. What you can do with these tokens is interesting though. So if you lock those tokens up, you are now in charge of voting for the various pools on the platform. And your vote actually helps decide where the next epoch's emissions will be going. So which pools will reward liquidity providers. And in exchange for your vote power, you will receive all of the swap fees for the pool you voted for, in addition to any additional voting incentives deposited by the protocol who is working with us on building this liquidity pool. So it's a very active process. You can see how there's a relationship between the vote escrowed token voters and the liquidity pool liquidity providers. It's this very cyclical nature. So if you're able to attract votes, you will attract the emission token reward. So that's kind of how these protocols differ from, say, a traditional DEX like Uniswap.
Yeah. Why do you like, so currently if you kind of look on like DeFi Llama or something like that, you can see that both Aerodrome and Velodrome are like out competing Uniswap on the layer twos that they happen to be on, Optimism and Base. Like, what do you think it is about like this token distribution mechanism that kind of gives them an advantage over something that's not doing that?
I think it comes down to a couple things. First of all, we exclusively focus on the ecosystems within, Aerodrome, we're in the Base ecosystem, Velodrome, we're in the Optimism ecosystem. So our team can focus, exclusively on the protocols within those ecosystems. So we're not spread, thin across lots and lots of EVM chains. We are not 100% permissionless. So in terms of like getting a gauge for an emission token, you have to work closely with our team to make sure your token is safe. You have a good strategy for incentivizing voting, and there's a good reason for you to include your token or liquidity on the DEX in the first place. That's kind of like from a high level how we operate. The reason that our DEX has been so successful in terms of attracting liquidity is because of the incentives multipliers that protocols can achieve. And what I mean by that is for every dollar in voting incentives a protocol allocates to their pool, they will receive, or liquidity providers will receive $3 on Aerodrome for that $1 of incentives. So it's a 3-to-1 multiplier in terms of LP rewards per dollar of voting incentives on Aerodrome. Velodrome, which has been around quite a bit longer, receives like 1.5 to 2x the multiplier. So there's still a very, like I said, it's the most capital efficient way of incentivizing liquidity. That's kind of the best selling point from a protocol point of view. Like, why should I, work with Aerodrome and Velodrome? Beyond that, there are some, the non intangible benefits, I would say, of working with our team. So we've been around since the very early days of like Solidly. We've seen all of it. We know what works, what doesn't work, how to spot shenanigans, how to work with good teams, how to manage partners well. It's something that requires a lot more effort than, say, a Uniswap, which is mostly focused on developing and providing the permissionless experience. We are much more of a white glove operation that works directly with protocols to make sure that they have the right strategy in place.
Okay, yeah, going off of that. So I was talking to some of the teams on Solana, and since like a lot of their kind of swaps go through aggregators, a lot of the competitive edge that DEXs have is just offering good execution, because if they don't, nobody will use their liquidity. So how do you think like that differs on platforms where aggregators are not used as often by people who are like swapping? And like, how do you get, like, I guess the white glove experience kind of help bring people to your protocol?
Yeah, so I would say that I agree with a lot of the people that you've spoken to in terms of like all volume eventually will flow through aggregators. It just makes a lot of sense because you're getting the most efficient use of your capital. Like if you want to make a swap, you want to get the most amount of the other asset, right? And when it comes to on-chain liquidity, that means you're going to have to pull from a lot of different sources. The way that we look at getting the majority of volumes is by obviously integrating with all those aggregators as well. We only recently released our concentrated liquidity pools in the last, I would say, month and a half for Velodrome and week for Aerodrome. So there's still a process that we have to go through to make sure that we have all the top integrators, driving liquidity or driving swaps to our pool, getting volume to our pools. Kind of piggybacking on my point about why it's an easy way for us to get liquidity, we'll also be receiving a large majority of the volumes as well once we have the liquidity in place. On Base, for example, we've already hit 40% of Uniswap's volume share. Similar on Optimism. We are quite confident that once the integrators or aggregators have integrated on top of our pools, we will completely, vamp the volume away from Uniswap. And what's interesting about that is this is sort of a self-fulfilling or self-optimizing process where the more the volume we get driven to our pools, the higher fees that are generated by those pools as well. And if you understand kind of how our DEX works, all of those swap fees are going to be going to pools, to the voters who, designate their votes to those pools because they're entitled to 100% of rewards. So what you're going to see is kind of this self-fulfilling feedback loop, or it's the flywheel that we like to call it, kicks off. If like an ETH USDC pool generates a ton of fees from swaps, that means there's going to be a lot of rewards for voters to have access to. They're going to put all of their votes into the ETH USDC pool, which will drive more rewards back to liquidity providers, and TVL goes up that way too. So this is kind of how we envision our strategy playing out for Aerodrome on Base and Velodrome on Optimism.
Totally makes sense. So one thing about like the Aero and the Velodrome token that kind of differs itself from a lot of like governance tokens and stuff like that is that the people who hold them, if they like stake them and participate, are getting like direct flows from the protocol. How do you guys kind of see like the valuing of your token difference to like valuing of some other token that's more just like governance rights?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. There's kind of a lot of ways to do it. So one thing to kind of preface ahead of time is that personally, we look at liquid tokens as purely for LP incentives. Um, there's some other things you can do with liquid Arrow and Velo, but when it comes to like, there's the liquid token and there's the locked token. I think there should be a separate conversation around both of those. As I said before, when it comes down to liquid tokens, those are going to go to liquidity providers. And as we've been talking about how it's an efficient way for people to provide liquidity because you're getting like a 3-to-1 or a 2-to-1 ratio on vote incentives to, liquidity provider incentives to votes. It's likely they're going to realize a lot of those Arrow tokens or Relo tokens and just sell them for yield for their liquidity. There are a couple other things to do. Obviously, we've started to see some other protocols incorporate us from like a composability point of view. So there's lending markets now for Arrow and Velo. There are on-chain perpetuals markets as well. There's leverage yield farming. So there's some things you can do with the token, if you earn it as a liquidity provider. Protocols that we work with are also oftentimes generating Arrow and Velo rewards with their own protocol-owned liquidity. And it's a really flexible process and journey that they can take with those tokens. We've seen a lot of our partners actually recycle those rewards back into their voting incentives. So not only are they generating, they're making their own treasury productive, but they're generating a valuable token that they can use to incentivize more liquidity for their pool. So it's like a zero cost basis approach of incentivizing liquidity. They can also lock those tokens. And I think that kind of, leads me to my next point around like, how do you try and value a protocol? So one of the core components of our protocol is that 100% of rewards that are generated by the protocol go to voters. So having a large vote position, VE Arrow or VE Velo, is going to give you a larger share of those rewards. And I think that's really the best approach to trying to understand a value. There's two components to, I guess, the fundamental approach. It's like you can look at discounted cash flows. So what are the previous epochal yields like in terms of APRs? There's also just like general growth of the protocol. So are those fees and revenues, and is the TVL going up? Is the swap volume going up? That's another way you can like look at trying to value. But this is crypto. We know that valuations and fundamentals oftentimes diverge, and we were born in a bear market. I think what it comes down to is like this team bet on ourselves, and we knew the only way that we could, make it is by providing this very sensible incentive structure that works for protocols, it works for LPs, and we just make it, accessible for everyone. So I think the most like interesting thing about the VE NFT primitive is that we haven't done anything outside of voting with it yet. So I'm personally quite excited about what else you can do with it. We know there's demand for the VE NFT. There's very active secondary markets. I think you can probably find discounted VE Velo or VE Arrow between, as low as say 40 cents on the dollar and as high as like 70 cents on the dollar, because you do have to essentially take a discount if you're a seller on the time it takes to fully vest those tokens in the VE NFT. Because you have to lock your tokens to create the VE Velo or VE Arrow position anywhere from like a day out to 4 years. So we know there's demand. Maybe the design space is something that we need to spend a little bit more time looking into. So like, what can you do with the VE NFT? I've got a lot of ideas, for like a self-repaying loan could be a very easy way of like making it composable.
Makes sense. So I guess another thing that I've been thinking about is that like when you look at like the total number of wallets that are active in DeFi, well, especially like DEXs and stuff, the L2s are like kind of completely dominating ETH, but ETH is still kind of like winning in volume. I haven't checked most recently, but I still think it is. How do you kind of see like the relationship between DeFi on layer twos and DeFi on ETH kind of playing out? And like kind of what's your guys' thesis about this?
Yeah, I think you're right when it comes to volume. Mainnet is still king, and the primary driver for that is just the base layer security. Um, Layer two transaction counts are exceeding Ethereum layer one transaction counts now, and I think it's quite obvious. It's like they're just a lot cheaper. And especially after 4844 and some of the gas optimizations have been implemented by the L2s, it's like all of the activity is eventually going to move that direction. The primary reason for, I would say, whale volume staying on mainnet is because of the sequencers. And decentralizing the sequencers is going to provide an additional layer of security for tokens that are, bridged to the L2s. So that's one of the things that, OP Labs is working on. It's like you got to have a very secure layer two before you see that huge influx of TVL. So, we're in the low single digit billions on the layer twos. I think, triple digit billions on layer one, and that shift should be pretty continuous as we see progress made on the security front. That's really what it comes down to. I think layer one will continue to operate as a settlement layer, but all of the innovation that I've observed and the strongest teams are coming out with a layer two solution, whether they're porting their entire protocol over to layer two or they're starting from scratch on a new protocol. Having a layer two strategy is an imperative, check mark to success. Coinbase, for example, is onboarding users directly to Base Chain. Coinbase Wallet has Base integrated, and I'm sure that they understand the limitations of like the layer one transaction fees, and that's why you've got to have that. And you mentioned like Solana earlier, and you could tell like retail, even when it showed up just kind of briefly during like the meme coin craze, they preferred to operate on Solana because it was a fraction of the cost, and the wallet experience is very good. So it seems like that's going to happen again as we progress into this cycle.
Yeah, it feels like only like the biggest of whales, or like can really operate on mainnet in a way that's economically sustainable.
Yep.
So, how like what things are on the horizon for Aerodrome and Velodrome, and kind of what things are you guys excited about?
Yeah. So what's exciting for us on the Aerodrome front is being kind of at the epicenter of Base Chain. And it's probably worth talking a bit about our relationship with Base, the team, and then, kind of why we positioned ourselves on Base Chain. It was pretty obvious to us in terms of like making a bet to expand to Base because of a couple of reasons. Like number one, Coinbase is a humongous faucet for new entrants and easy access to liquidity. We really believed in the vision that like Brian Armstrong and Jesse Pollock put out. It's like not only are they, preaching the good word of like crypto decentralization ethos, they're practicing it by maintaining an OP stack layer two. They've talked about wanting to bring their whole business on chain, which I think is phenomenal, be a step forward for the whole crypto industry in terms of like transparency and security. So we spoke to Jesse early on. He was very excited about, anyone building on Base. They maintain sort of the step back approach from builders and kept it quite permissionless and open, and that was something that kind of surprised me, considering Base is run by a compliant organization like Coinbase. So they maintain that open builder ethos, and it's been a really, really great journey for us. Like Coinbase Ventures obviously invested in the Arrow token. They bought it on the secondary market, which is they've only done that one other time. which is like a good show of confidence and faith by the team that we're doing something right. And Jesse now is happy to partner in terms of like sending new protocols to us first. He's really excited about Airdrome being sort of the hub of trading activity for all sorts of projects on base chain. And I'm not sure if you saw the announcement yesterday, but Coinbase and Base are doing this on-chain Summer 2 initiative. So they're going to continue to cultivate kind of the culture that's organically arisen on base chain. So bringing in lots of new builders and new users, more experimentation, that has got us very excited because Aerodrome's entire mission is to be the deep base chain liquidity hub. So we want every protocol to work with us in terms of like helping them with their liquidity needs. So that gets us excited about Aerodrome. Velodrome, we just released an article today that you should definitely share in the show notes about our expansion plans across the Optimism superchain. So Optimism mainnet is sort of the highest TVL, highest transaction count superchain layer 2 currently. But the vision for Optimism is to have a composable network of layer 2 chains. And I'm personally like very excited about how this will look in a couple of years. It's sort of the grand vision, sort of end game for Ethereum scaling. Something that a lot of the pundits have been concerned with when it comes to layer 2s is the fragmentation of liquidity and the fragmentation of experience. So Optimism is taking an approach to, essentially ameliorate against having to have a lot of different chains and a lot of different liquidity pools and doing bridges across all of these by developing interoperability standards. And we want to be kind of the liquidity chain that facilitates liquidity for all of these new application-specific layer 2s or general purpose layer 2 chains that are going to be connected to the superchain. So our first deployment outside of the Optimism layer 1 or Optimism mainnet is going to be on Mode. Mode actually just announced their token this week as well. So there'll be some kind of dual incentives programs for Velodrome on Mode chain. On the heels of Mode, we'll be deploying on Build on Bitcoin. And following that, we'll be deploying to Lisk. So we have 3 L2 superchains that are going to be called the Velodrome Superchain Beta. So this will be a really nice way for chains to have essentially a dual incentivization program. So Velodrome is very much going to be evolving from like a protocol level incentivization scheme to more of a chain level incentivization product because it helps bootstrap new projects within new ecosystems kind of on 2 fronts. So the chains can help with their own incentives, whether they're points or they're a token. And Velodrome also has the same setup where we can help a protocol design a liquidity strategy, give them a gauge to incentivize liquidity providers and allow them to incentivize votes. So what's very cool about that is that Velodrome, like the VE Velo voting process, is going to be multi-chain. You'll have Optimism mainnet gauges, and you'll have all of the layer 2s that are connected to the superchain have their own vote pools as well. So the Velo emissions will be going all around the superchain L2s. Long term, this is obviously going to be an interoperable system. So we'd like to say it's going to be a single chain or a single protocol that services liquidity for all of the layer 2s connected to the superchain.
Oh, that's really cool. I haven't heard about that yet. So I guess stepping a little bit back from your work at Velodrome and Aerodrome, what other things in crypto are you kind of excited about?
Yeah, I mean, there's always something really new and fun to experiment with. Like today, we received our friend tokens from FriendTech. I'm one of those people that if I see something new and it's related to Web3 and like a wallet experience, I'm gonna try it. Like I'll mint a random, new NFT token standard. I'll deposit a little bit of ETH into like a SocialFi app and see what the UX is like. I think that there's always going to be something cool to play around with. And I mean, I obviously encourage people to just keep your mind open, and it takes like a minute of your time usually to dig into something new. And oftentimes it can be either fun or lucrative or provide all other opportunities, for work. So that's something that always keeps me interested. Just follow the new protocols and give them a shot. The other thing that I think we're just sort of understanding is we are still so early to this whole thing. One of the, we've got a very cynical, oftentimes it feels like you got people talking about how we've made no progress in the last, I don't know, 5 years in DeFi. Um, and I think that's it's like we have the most absurdly outrageous expectations. So it's like the old adage here is like you overestimate the potential in the near term and underestimate the potential in the long term. I feel like we're having a existential crisis moment in crypto because all we've seen are, meme coins pumping and people who are doing a lot of work on, the infrastructure or the application front don't get the attention. And we have this sort of, we're a gambling medium point of view. And it's like, if you take a step back and you realize like how far we've come in terms of the layer two scaling solutions, parallelized EVM blockchains, interoperability in Cosmos, bridges, all of this stuff wasn't around 3 years ago. You start to see, okay, we are we are making tons of progress. It's still exciting. Coinbase and other huge institutions like BlackRock are betting heavily on tokenization of the broader global financial system, and they move slow. Like we're used to permissionless, trustless systems where you can like to build an open source and just like go. No one's going to stop you. But we do have to be like pragmatic and realistic that if we're going to achieve the success of, say, what traditional finance has achieved on blockchain rails, it's going to require a lot of work across like the technology and regulatory front. So that's what really gets me interested is like how early we still are. I don't know how many times you've had a dinner conversation, someone asks you what you do, and you start talking about crypto, and they just like look at you wide eyed. We have no idea what questions to even ask. So I think that sort of perspective keeps me grounded and also keeps me really excited. Um, and like selfishly, you said outside of Aerodrome and Velodrome, I think talking to people like you and other well-respected media and research outlets is something that we have been overlooked personally. I think we've been overlooked a lot. So I appreciate these opportunities and expect to get a lot more attention just purely based on the metrics that our protocols have been cranking out.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a great way to end things. Thank you for coming on and sharing your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jack.